In less than a month, a new president of the United States of America will be elected. On the 5th of November, the people of liberty and freedom will elect their new ruler. One of the potential candidates is Donald Trump, who has repeatedly promised to put an end to the flying bombs in Eastern Europe. Moreover, he has promised to do it in less than 24 hours. It sounds good, right? I mean, the US president, who stands for liberty and democracy, wants to stop a war that has dragged on for 3 years now and looks like a dead conflict for everybody, where hundreds of people die by missile strikes every day, including civilians. The promise sure looks appealing, but what could be Trump's 24-hour plan? And what could he actually achieve in 24 hours? There have been many speculations that Trump will go on to make the West recognize Putin's claims on Ukrainian territory. But what is he exactly going to do? And what other options are there on the table for him? First, let's talk about the obvious. It is very possible that Trump might pressure Ukraine into accepting a peace agreement that favors Russia. This most likely means pressuring Ukraine to give up certain territories, such as Donbass and Crimea, which are currently held by Russia. He might pressure Ukraine to give up claims to these areas for any further escalation. He could also try to broker a ceasefire with the promise of future diplomatic talks, freezing the conflict rather than resolving it. The last and the worst thing Trump might do is to threaten to cut military and financial support to Ukraine unless they agree to negotiate terms with Russia. This would significantly weaken Ukraine's negotiating position. Things were not made easier for Zelensky as well after his visit to the US in September 2024.
Trump accused Zelensky on the eve of the visit of refusing to strike a deal with Moscow and once again questioned why the United States was giving billions of dollars to Kyiv. A shark al-Assad.
The second strategy might be negotiations with Russia and personal diplomacy. Trump has emphasized his ability to negotiate directly with adversaries, so he might use personal diplomacy with Putin. Trump could attempt to strike a direct deal with Vladimir Putin, possibly offering sanctions relief or security guarantees in exchange for a Russian withdrawal or halt to further aggression. He might suggest an agreement where Ukraine would agree to remain neutral, outside of NATO and other Western alliances, which could be an incentive for Russia to de-escalate. Third strategy might be leveraging US allies to shift policy. Trump has been critical of NATO in the past and could try to convince European allies to reduce their support for Ukraine, which could pressure Kyiv to negotiate with Russia. By suggesting that the US would not support continued efforts in Ukraine, he could force European nations to reconsider their role in the conflict. This is, however, very unlikely, considering how deeply Europe supports Ukraine and how much investment EU has done to its military in the past few years. The fourth and very likely option is appealing to domestic US audiences. Trump's comments could also reflect his desire to appeal to American voters who are war-weary or focused on domestic issues. He might focus on cutting US involvement, arguing that the war is not in America's interest, and advocate for reducing US involvement, leading to a forced resolution by Ukraine and Russia, even if it is unfavorable to Ukraine. So, now that the obvious options are on the table, one might wonder, is there anything else? Are there any more controversial Trump strategies that might be on the table, something that the general public won't foresee? Although unlikely, nothing should be ruled out. So here are some more things Trump could do. One is to strategically neutralize NATO's influence. Why, you would ask? Trump has been openly critical of NATO, questioning its relevance and the financial burden it places on the US. He could have a deeper agenda in trying to diminish NATO's role in European security, particularly in Eastern Europe. By seeking a quick resolution in Ukraine, Trump could indirectly weaken NATO's expansionist influence by neutralizing Ukraine's NATO ambitions or establishing a precedent for non-intervention. If Trump successfully pushes for a US retreat from the conflict, it could send a signal that the US is not interested in entangling itself in European military conflicts, potentially emboldening other adversaries like China. The second controversial plan might be a grand bargain with Russia. Behind the rhetoric of a 24-hour resolution, Trump might envision a grander geopolitical deal with Russia that extends beyond Ukraine. He could use the Ukraine conflict as leverage to negotiate on other key international issues, such as Russia as a counterweight to China. Trump has consistently emphasized the need to counter China's growing influence. He may believe that pulling Russia out of its partnership with China by offering substantial concessions like Ukraine or lifting sanctions could realign global power balances in the US's favor. By resolving the Ukraine conflict quickly, Trump might aim to woo Russia away from its economic and military partnership with Beijing by offering economic incentives, such as oil deals or investments in Russia, in exchange for peace in Ukraine, potentially reducing Russia's reliance on China. This is, of course, a far fetch, considering that the US allies in Europe don't want anything to do with Russia and have begun to also distance themselves from China, but nevertheless is an option. Want to know more controversial topics? Hit the like, subscribe, and bell notification button to stay updated. Continuing on the same note, the third strategy might be to pivot to Asia and away from Europe. Trump has long argued that the US should focus on its interests in Asia, particularly countering China's rise, rather than being drawn into Europe's conflicts. His public plan to end the Ukraine war may be part of a larger strategy to shift US focus to Asia, where the potential threat from China looms larger. A rapid resolution in Ukraine could free up US resources for dealing with China, including military assets and diplomatic attention. Fourth controversial strategy might be the bait and switch on foreign policy. Trump has a history of contradicting himself on major foreign policy issues, making a bait and switch tactic plausible. Trump's 24-hour plan may primarily serve as a rhetorical tool to differentiate himself from the Biden administration and appeal to a specific voter base. Once in power, however, he may revert to a more measured, behind-the-scenes approach that doesn't resolve the conflict quickly, but gradually shifts the dynamics of the US's involvement. Trump might publicly suggest a quick withdrawal of support for Ukraine, but then engage in secret diplomatic efforts to maintain US influence in the region, while still claiming he's ending the war. The fifth and most unlikely is intentional chaos to reshape global order. Trump's foreign policy has often relied on unpredictability as a strategy. A sudden shift in US involvement in Ukraine might create chaos that could be used to reshape global alliances or push for new international order, disrupting traditional alliances. By withdrawing US support or making a rapid peace deal with Russia, Trump could cause European nations to question their reliance on the US for security, potentially fracturing NATO or the EU. This has already happened to some extent. Europe feels more insecure than ever since from the times of the Soviet Union, and have taken into consideration that the US under Trump might not be there for NATO if necessary. All of this seems appealing for the US people. After all, Trump needs to be elected as a president to bring his plan to life. But what if the opposite happens, and Kamala Harris will take the position of a 47th president? Kamala Harris's stance on Ukraine is closely aligned with the Biden administration's strategy, which emphasizes long-term financial and military support, while working to prevent escalation that could drag NATO or the US directly into the conflict. Harris has taken a strong internationalist approach, representing the US at major European security summits, and stressing the importance of NATO and global alliances. She has also highlighted the atrocities committed by Russia and supports holding Russian forces accountable for war crimes. If she becomes president, Harris is expected to continue providing support to Ukraine, but might encourage European allies to take a more prominent role in leading efforts against Russia.
On the face of it, it appears that a future Harris administration's policy toward Russia and Ukraine would represent continuity with that of the Biden administration. Meanwhile, Trump would reverse much of that policy, curtailing U.S. support for Kyiv and forcing it to negotiate a settlement with Moscow that falls far short of its aims in this war. Rooklings.
In conclusion, Trump's 24-hour idea has sparked many speculations across the world. It is important to note that Trump's claim to resolve the conflict quickly might also be more of a rhetorical strategy for campaigning, and the realities of diplomacy and war might prevent such a rapid resolution. As the time passes, Putin seems to be less willing to negotiate with the West. However, whether Trump can change anything is up to him.
Did I miss anything important in the video? Let me know in the comments and let's have a debate. Thank you for watching the video. You can help me by liking and subscribing, and I hope I somehow made your day a bit better.